The hype around the M4 iPad Pro is real. I mean, if you were watching like I was on YouTube, news feeds were flooded for months and months and months leading up to this one's release with speculation of all of the new specs it was going to have. OLED screens, correctly predicted. Some people thought it was going to be a 15-inch version. All kinds of theories of what it would have and how good that was going to be or not. I made a video talking about this recently and my feelings and got a lot of great feedback from people that actually made me rethink some things, and I wanted to remake this video to talk a little bit more thoughtfully about the hype cycle of this, the release, is it worth the hype, that kind of stuff. Now, as somebody who's watched a gazillion videos on iPads for years, reads comments thoroughly, has used my iPad in a ton of different settings, does this seem worthy of the hype or not? I'll say that my initial impressions of it were not exactly. And that's not to knock the OLED display. I know that OLED in a lot of ways is pretty much better than anything on the market, and the dual stacked one Apple made is pretty much better than anybody else's OLED on the market. And so, yeah, that's great. But it's not like the last two gens of iPad Pro with the mini LED, it's not like that was a bad display that was lacking in colors or black quality or anything like that. I think the worst thing most people said about it was they didn't like the blooming. Opinions vary a lot on that. I tend to lean more toward, it doesn't bother me a whole lot. I don't think it's that noticeable for things, especially if you're not in a super dark room. But some people have said that they feel like it completely ruined the screen experience and they hate it. And so if you're one of those people, maybe this is a worthy upgrade. I feel like a lot of the big review channels that obviously get the new device every year because they want to be able to review it, the tough part that creates for them from a review standpoint is they're often thinking of it in terms of how big of an upgrade is this from last year, when for the rest of us, that's not how often you probably upgrade your iPad. A lot of people talk about having it for 5, 6, 7 years. That was some of the feedback I even got on videos I've talked about it, where they're like, I have a 2017 one before there was even mini LED. And so for them, this new screen is amazing. That's worth bearing in mind as well. It's a very different discussion if you're saying, if you have a few gens back, is this a cool upgrade, versus if you have last year's model, is this exciting? Very different questions. For me, I don't think a lot of the changes, from the M1, M2 series are worth spending $1,000+ Like, yeah, moving the webcam from over here to here so that it's centered when you're in landscape mode, which is probably where most people are going to be doing video calls and stuff. Arguably, I think that should have been there the whole time. It's great to see that it's there, but is that worth $1,000? No. However, if you were already having an iPad that was old enough it was time to upgrade, awesome. The thinner design. I was of mixed opinion about that at first too, because I was like, I read comments all over the place. I can't really say that I've ever seen the masses saying, what we need is a thinner iPad. Whereas a comment that I have seen a lot is people saying the iPad has pretty much had 10 hours of battery life from the very first one, and that was cool back when a laptop only had 3 hours of battery life, but now that MacBooks are getting like 20+ hours, can we get an iPad that lasts a little longer? And it seemed like Apple instead went the route of, no, let's just try to keep it the same-ish and go thinner. To me, that was a little bit of a disappointment, but from a lot of the people that have held it, it seems like a popular saying is, trust me, if you hold it, the difference in what that feels like to hold it is incredible, and you can't really describe that. You just have to feel it for yourself. I trust that. I don't have any reason to doubt that. And so maybe that's a cool upgrade too. That's another one where you're like, if you had the last gen model, would you upgrade just for that? No. But if you're already willing to upgrade, this would be a really cool reason to finally pull the trigger on it. The other major thing that I thought was probably like where this struggles to live up to the hype in a way is just that my own feelings in certain ways, and one that I've seen predominantly all over the place on the web, is people saying, you either love iPad OS or you don't. If you're happy with it and you don't feel it limits you, awesome. But a lot of people do feel like, even if I'm not strictly trying to make this a MacBook replacement, still, there's a lot of apps, that are dumbed down versions of the one you could get on Mac, or sometimes there aren't even the right apps. Despite Apple saying that they've given the iPad a desktop class version of Safari, that's only sort of true. I work in web design and stuff a lot, and so there's builder tools and rendering stuff that is still a little wonky on the iPad that works fine on the MacBook, and so they're not one-to-one. They're not exactly the same browser, despite Apple saying that it is. I obviously understand that not everybody does video work and photo editing. And I see that in the comments a lot to reviewers, where people are like, reviewers always talk about how good this is for video editing, but they need to acknowledge that not everybody edits videos. Heard 100%. And for reference, when I first got an iPad Pro in 2021, I went for 2 weeks saying, let me try to run my entire life, my business and my personal life, from the iPad and not touch my computer. And in a lot of ways, I was impressed that I could. But it was stuff like video editing that I'm like, yeah, power-wise, it's very capable. But like interface-wise, I don't know. It was hard to say how much of what felt wonky to me was just I'm not used to it. I'm more comfortable with a real computer. And how much of it was real limitations. I will say that when I edit photos, the Lightroom version that's on iPad is dumbed down. You can do a lot of the same stuff, but you can't do stuff like AI denoise, and you can't do HDR stacking. To me, that's important. And so I end up doing a lot of that stuff on the MacBook. However, I also know that there's a ton of professional artists that make their money every day with an iPad, and it's great. And so I wouldn't stand, up like some people have and say you can't do real work on an iPad and it's a toy. It is an expensive entertainment device if that's what you're going to use it for, but there's a lot of people who use it for, stuff that an iPad is not limiting to them for. But I would say if you're a person who has felt like, what's wrong with the iPad is the dang operating system that's on it. And if you're one of the people who has had that opinion, it's fair to say this new iPad is not going to change any of that. Like, you're still going to be limited in the same ways. You're just going to have a better screen with an even faster processor and all of the limitations that you had before. The people who hate the Files app and feel that it's really limited, that's a bummer. Something that's a letdown for me related to Files is that you cannot format an external drive using the iPad. Now, I know that's not something you have to do very often, and for some of you, you might be like, who cares about that? It matters to me only because in those 2 weeks a couple years ago where I was exclusively using the iPad for everything, I ran into a scenario where I needed to format an old Western Digital drive and quickly found out that the iPad can't do that. Now, luckily, I had both a Windows computer and a MacBook in my house, so I had options, but it occurred to me, if I were trying to make this thing my only computer, what would I do? Like, suppose I didn't have any other computers. Would I now have to go to a friend's house to be like, can I format my drive on your computer? Just silly things like that you're like, I don't really understand why the iPad can't do that stuff. That may or may not matter to you. And if it matters to you, those limitations are still here, 100%. Like, this new iPad is just a hardware upgrade, pretty much. Like, nothing that I can see about the software is going to be any different. So that was where I was thinking about this initially. Like, I don't know that this lives up to the hype because people have complained in the past, even when this M2 version came out and they were like, the software is still limiting and they haven't done anything that fundamentally changes the experience of using an iPad. And with that argument in mind, this new one doesn't do anything that fundamentally changes the way the iPad works either. It just does the same thing faster and with a sexier screen. In that way, there's a lot of hype around this that I don't know that it lives up to, but to be fair, on the other hand, public opinion has swayed me a little bit. The last video that I made about this was more leaned toward, I can see where legitimately some of these hardware upgrades are exciting to some, but for someone like me, there's no sense of urgency to upgrade for those things. Like I said, I think the mini LED display is great. I'm very happy with it. I think it looks awesome. It's probably one of the best looking displays of any device I have in my house. So I'm not saying that I don't think the OLED would be even better, but it's not a $1,000 upgrade worth it to me. But obviously I have a recent model of it. If I was rocking a 6-year-old iPad, maybe I would feel differently. But much like I said in the last video, I invite you guys to share your opinions, especially if you're somebody who did recently get this iPad, whether you're on either end of it. If you're pretty much I want the iPad Pro as the best gaming and content consumption device on the market, what do you think about it? Does that screen totally change everything for you? Or are you feeling a little buyer's remorse, like, nah, this wasn't really as big of an upgrade as I hoped? And if you do pro work on your iPad, other than digital art or AI-related things, where this new M4, as I understand it, is much faster at AI neural processing type work, one gentleman said to me that it literally cut his rendering time in half with the new M4. So I admit that's a thing I hadn't thought of initially. It is a benefit of all this new horsepower. where else you otherwise might say, if the M2 is already fast enough for you, what's the point of even more? I'm curious to see what you guys think. I love polling the viewers for that. I get a lot of great feedback and stuff that helps me make more content as well, like I'm doing now. So I invite you to share your experience below. And what do you think about what we ended up with the new hardware in this? Was it what you were hoping for, or are you kind of disappointed with the release? And what do you think about the limitations of iOS? Appreciate hearing from you. And otherwise, guys, I'll catch you in the next one.